The impossible choice. The silence in the diplomatic chamber was so thick it could have been cut with a plasma blade. Captain Sarah Martinez sat perfectly still across from the Zephyrian delegation, her dark eyes betraying nothing of the storm raging inside her mind. The holographic display floating between them showed the same devastating image that had haunted human nightmares for the past 72 hours. The complete orbital bombardment of New Geneva Colony, reduced to ash and memory in under 6 minutes. High Arbiter Colton, a crystalline being whose faceted body reflected the chamber's blue lighting in thousands of tiny rainbows, spoke with the measured tone of someone who had mediated disputes between species for over 3 centuries. His translated voice carried an undertone of weary resignation that made Sarah's stomach clench. The charges brought forth by the Zephyrian Empire are substantial, Colton intoned, each word carefully chosen. Illegal mining operations in disputed territory, violation of the Kepler Accords, and direct interference with Zephyrian colonial expansion rights. The evidence presented appears conclusive. Sarah kept her expression neutral even as her mind raced through the implications. The evidence was manufactured, of course. Every human with half a brain cell knew that. But proving it would take months, maybe years, and the Zephyrians had made it clear that humanity didn't have that kind of time. 3 more colonies hung in the balance, their populations evacuated but their infrastructure still vulnerable to the same fate as New Geneva. Commander Thex, the Zephyrian representative, rose from his position with the fluid grace that made his species such formidable opponents. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, his 4 arms moved in perfect synchronization as he activated his own holographic display. His scaled hide showed patterns of deep purple and gold that shifted based on his emotional state, currently displaying what human xenobiologists had learned to recognize as supreme confidence mixed with barely contained aggression. "The violations are clear," Thex declared, his translated voice carrying harmonics that made most humans instinctively uncomfortable. The human expansion into the Kepler belt was unauthorized and directly challenged our ancient territorial claims. The destruction of New Geneva was merely the first consequence of their continued lawlessness. Ambassador Chen, Sarah's superior and the head of the human delegation, leaned forward slightly. The old man had been negotiating with alien species since before Sarah was born, but even his decades of experience couldn't hide the strain in his voice. "Commander Thex, surely we can reach a more measured solution. The families who lived on New Geneva were civilians, many of them children." The response was disproportionate to any alleged violation. The patterns on Thex's hide shifted to what Sarah recognized as disdain, mixed with something that might have been amusement if Zephyrians were capable of finding humor in such situations. "The weak attempt to invoke emotional manipulation is noted and dismissed," Thex replied coldly. "Your species chose to ignore our warnings. The consequences were clearly stated in advance." High Arbiter Colton's crystalline form pulsed with a soft amber light, a sign that he was about to render judgment. Sarah felt her heart rate spike despite her training. Everything depended on the next few moments. Given the evidence presented and the severity of the allegations, Colton began, "This tribunal finds sufficient grounds for the Zephyrian Empire's claims. However, in accordance with Galactic Consortium law, the accused species maintains the right to trial by champion if diplomatic resolution cannot be achieved." Sarah's breath caught. Trial by champion was an ancient practice, a relic from the early days of the consortium, when member species were still working out the complexities of interspecies law. It was rarely invoked anymore, mainly because most civilized species had moved beyond settling disputes through combat. But it was still legal, still binding, and still a way for a smaller, weaker species to potentially overcome impossible odds through the skills of a single individual. Commander Thex's high patterns shifted to what Sarah now realized was anticipation mixed with bloodthirsty satisfaction. The Zephyrian Empire accepts the human request for trial by champion. We choose Vexthera, Blade of the Solar Winds, Conqueror of 7 worlds, undefeated in 43 trials. The holographic display shifted to show a creature that made Sarah's blood run cold despite her military training. Vexthera stood nearly 12 feet tall, her 6 arms each ending in natural bone blades that had been honed to molecular sharpness. Her exoskeleton was a deep crimson that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and her multiple eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of intelligence as sharp as her natural weapons. Across her carapace were ritual scars, each one representing a fallen opponent in previous trials. Vexthera has never lost a trial by champion. Thex continued, his voice now carrying what could only be described as glee. She has faced the greatest warriors from 17 different species. She has defeated beings twice her size and creatures with natural armor that could deflect artillery shells. Your species will have one opportunity to select a champion. When that champion falls, humanity will withdraw from all disputed territories and submit to Zephyrian oversight of your colonial expansion for the next century. Ambassador Chen looked like he had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, the desperate search for alternatives that simply didn't exist. The human military's best fighters were impressive by human standards, but against a creature like Vexthera, even their enhanced soldiers would last maybe 30 seconds before being carved into pieces. How long do we have to select our champion? Chen asked, his diplomatic training keeping his voice steady despite the hopelessness of the situation. Standard consortium procedure allows for 72 hours of preparation. High Arbiter Colton replied. The trial will take place in the Grand Arena on Station Omega, with full media coverage as required by law. The champion must be a natural citizen of the species they represent, with no artificial enhancements beyond standard life support equipment. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar sensation she remembered from her military days when impossible missions suddenly revealed unexpected solutions. She looked at the holographic image of Vexthera again, this time not seeing the terrifying predator, but analyzing the data with the cold precision that had made her one of humanity's most effective strategic planners. "I'll do it," she said quietly. The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Chen turned to stare at her with an expression of complete disbelief. "Sarah, you can't be serious. You're a diplomat, not a fighter. That thing will kill you in seconds." Sarah stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She had made her decision, and now she needed to convince everyone else that it wasn't suicide. "I'm not just a diplomat, Ambassador. I spent 8 years in special operations before joining the diplomatic corps. I studied xenobiology for the past decade, including detailed analysis of Zephyrian physiology and psychology. And most importantly, I've been preparing for exactly this scenario for the past 6 months." Commander Thex's hide patterns shifted to what Sarah was learning to recognize as confusion mixed with contempt. "You have been preparing for trial by champion for 6 months. How did you know such a trial would be necessary?" Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber, and something in that smile made even the massive Zephyrian take a half step backward. "Because, Commander, unlike your species, humans don't just react to threats. We anticipate them. We plan for contingencies that might never happen. And sometimes, when everyone expects us to fail, we find ways to turn impossible odds into inevitable victories." High Arbiter Colton's crystalline form pulsed with a pattern that Sarah's translator rendered as curiosity mixed with concern. "Captain Martinez, you understand that this trial is to the death or incapacitation. There will be no rules beyond basic consortium law, no weapons restrictions, no safety protocols. Vexthera has killed beings far larger and stronger than any human." Sarah nodded, her expression never wavering. "I understand the stakes perfectly, High Arbiter, and I accept them willingly on behalf of humanity." Ambassador Chen grabbed her arm as she moved toward the door. "Sarah, this is madness. Even if you have some kind of plan, you're talking about facing the most dangerous warrior in the known galaxy. Please, let's find another way." Sarah placed her hand over his, her touch gentle, but her voice filled with quiet certainty. "There is no other way, Ambassador. This was always going to come down to one human standing against impossible odds. The only question was whether we'd be ready when the moment arrived." As she walked toward the exit, Sarah could feel the eyes of every being in the chamber following her. To them, she knew she looked like just another human walking toward certain death, another example of their species' tendency toward noble, but ultimately futile gestures. They had no idea what was coming. The next 72 hours would either mark the end of human expansion into the galaxy or the beginning of something that would change the balance of power between species forever. Sarah Martinez had spent her entire adult life preparing for challenges that seemed impossible, and this one would either prove her greatest triumph or her final failure. As the chamber doors closed behind her, she was already running through the final preparations for a plan that had been months in the making. A plan that depended not on human strength or speed, but on something far more dangerous: human ingenuity applied to problems that other species never even thought to consider. In 72 hours, Vex Thera would learn why humans had spread across the galaxy despite being physically inferior to almost every other spacefaring species. She would learn why humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their numbers, but their ability to think in ways that other species considered impossible. And in the grand arena, with billions of beings watching, Captain Sarah Martinez would either die quickly or demonstrate exactly why the universe should never underestimate a species that had clawed its way up from a single world to challenge the established order of galactic civilization. The countdown had begun. The 10-second victory. The grand arena on Station Omega had hosted thousands of events over its 3-century existence, but never had the atmosphere been quite so electric with anticipation and dread. Nearly 200,000 beings from across the galaxy filled the massive amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of sounds, lights, and chemical signals that the station's translation systems struggled to process. Sarah Martinez stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena floor, running through her final mental checklist for what felt like the 1,000th time. The room was stark and utilitarian, designed to serve any species that might need it. For the past 3 days, it had been her laboratory, her workshop, and her sanctuary as she prepared for what every expert in the galaxy was calling certain death. Ambassador Chen paced behind her, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. "It's not too late to find another solution, Sarah. We could petition for extended negotiations, maybe bring in the Centauri Coalition as mediators." Sarah checked the seals on her combat suit one final time. The suit itself was standard human military issue, designed for zero combat and environmental protection. What wasn't standard were the modifications she had spent the past 72 hours implementing with the help of a team of human engineers who had worked around the clock to make her vision reality. "Ambassador, in approximately 15 minutes, I'm going to walk into that arena and face the most dangerous predator in known space. I need you to understand something important. I'm not going out there to die heroically for humanity. I'm going out there to win." The conviction in her voice made Chen stop pacing. He stared at her for a long moment, seeing something in her expression that he hadn't noticed before. There was no fear, no desperate bravado, just the calm certainty of someone who had solved a complex problem and was about to demonstrate the solution. Above them, the arena hummed with activity as the preliminary ceremonies reached their conclusion. High Arbiter Colton's crystalline form cast prismatic patterns across the sand as he explained the rules to the assembled crowd. The trial would continue until one champion yielded, was incapacitated, or died. No outside assistance would be permitted once combat began. The champion who emerged victorious would determine the fate of their entire species' claim to the disputed territories. In the Zephyrian preparation chamber on the opposite side of the arena, Vex Thera performed the ritual combat meditations that had preceded each of her 43 victories. Her 6 arms moved through precise patterns that honed her reflexes to their absolute peak, while her multiple eyes tracked potential threats in a 360-degree field of awareness that no human could match. Commander Thex observed her preparations with satisfaction. The human's confidence was either admirable courage or spectacular delusion, but either way, it would make no difference against the blade of the solar winds. Vexthera had faced opponents with superior technology, greater size, and even psychic abilities. None had survived more than a few minutes against her speed and natural weapons. The human will likely attempt to use ranged combat, Thex advised, though he knew Vexthera needed no tactical guidance. Their species favors projectile weapons and avoidance tactics when facing superior physical opponents. Vexthera's response was a series of harmonic clicks that translated roughly to confident dismissal. She had faced ranged combatants before. The arena's design made sustained ranged combat impossible, and once she closed the distance, the human's inferior reflexes and fragile physiology would make the outcome inevitable. The signal chime echoed through both preparation chambers. It was time. Sarah walked through the corridor toward the arena entrance, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind her, Ambassador Chen and the small human delegation followed at a respectful distance. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. The arena doors opened with a massive grinding sound that reverberated through the amphitheater. Sarah stepped onto the sand, and the crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Most species present had never seen a human champion in trial by champion, and their first impression was not encouraging. At 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing perhaps 140 pounds, Sarah looked like a child compared to the warriors most species would have chosen. From the opposite entrance, Vexthera emerged to thunderous approval from the Zephyrian section and respectful silence from most other species. She moved with the fluid grace of a perfect predator, each step calculated for maximum efficiency. Her 6 arms swayed slightly as she walked, the bone blades at their tips catching the arena lights in ways that made them seem to glow with their own inner fire. The two champions met at the center of the arena, standing precisely 10 meters apart as required by consortium law. The size difference was even more striking up close. Vexthera towered over Sarah, her multiple eyes studying the human with the focused attention of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. High Arbiter Colten's voice echoed across the arena as he began the formal opening of the trial. Champions of humanity and the Zephyrian Empire, you stand here to settle a dispute that diplomacy could not resolve. The laws of the Galactic Consortium govern this trial. Combat will continue until one champion yields, is incapacitated, or dies. Do you both understand and accept these terms? I understand and accept, Vexthera replied, her translated voice carrying harmonics that most species associated with predatory confidence. I understand and accept, Sarah said simply, her much quieter voice nonetheless carrying clearly across the arena through the amplification systems. Then let the trial begin, Colten declared, his crystalline form rising above the combat area to ensure the clearest possible view of the proceedings. For the first few seconds, neither champion moved. Vexthera circled slowly, her blade-tipped arms weaving hypnotic patterns designed to confuse and disorient prey species. Sarah remained perfectly still, her hands at her sides, apparently studying her opponent with calm interest. The crowd grew restless. Most trials began with immediate, explosive violence. This strange pause felt ominous, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then Vexthera struck. She moved faster than human eyes could properly track, covering the 10-meter distance in a blur of crimson chitin and gleaming bone. Her attack was a masterpiece of predatory efficiency, 6 arms striking from different angles simultaneously to make evasion impossible. Sarah didn't try to evade. Instead, she took one step forward and pressed a control on her suit's chest panel. What happened next would be analyzed by xenobiologists and military strategists for decades afterward, but to the crowd in the arena, it appeared almost magical. Vexthera's charge continued for exactly 3 more steps before she simply collapsed, her massive form hitting the sand with a sound like a falling tree. For a moment, the arena was completely silent. 200,000 beings tried to process what they had just witnessed. The most feared warrior in the galaxy had been defeated in under 10 seconds, without the human champion even raising her hands in defense. Sarah walked calmly over to where Vexthera lay twitching on the sand, her 6 arms moving spasmodically, but without coordination or strength. The Zephyrian champion's multiple eyes were still alert and aware, but her body no longer responded to her commands. "What have you done?" Vexthera managed to ask, her voice strained but still carrying the harmonic patterns of her species. Sarah knelt beside the fallen warrior, her expression respectful but determined. "I studied your species for 6 months, Vexthera. Not just your physical capabilities, but your neurology, your biochemistry, your evolutionary history. Zephyrians evolved from pack hunters on a high-gravity world with an atmosphere rich in certain metallic compounds. Your nervous system developed incredible speed and coordination, but it also developed a very specific vulnerability." She gestured to her combat suit, which was now emitting a barely audible harmonic frequency. Zephyrian neural pathways are incredibly efficient, but they're also susceptible to very specific electromagnetic interference. The frequency my suit is generating right now is disrupting the electrical signals between your brain and your motor cortex. You can think, you can see, you can speak, but you can't coordinate complex movement. Vexthera's eyes widened with what might have been respect mixed with disbelief. "Impossible. Our medical science would have discovered such a vulnerability centuries ago." Sarah smiled grimly. "Your medical science was looking for diseases and injuries that naturally occur on your homeworld. You weren't looking for artificially generated electromagnetic interference at frequencies that don't exist in nature." It took human scientists analyzing combat recordings of 43 different species to identify the pattern and develop the specific frequency needed. Around the arena, the crowd was beginning to understand what they had witnessed. This wasn't a victory through superior strength or speed. This was a victory through preparation, analysis, and the kind of lateral thinking that had made humanity dangerous despite their physical limitations. High Arbiter Colton descended toward the arena floor, his crystalline form pulsing with patterns that indicated profound surprise mixed with judicial consideration. "The trial appears to be concluded. Does the Zephyrian champion yield?" Vexthera's response came after a long pause, during which her warrior's pride warred with the reality of her situation. Finally, she managed to speak the words that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. "I yield to the human champion." The arena erupted. Some species cheered, others expressed various forms of shock or outrage, and a few maintained the respectful silence that their cultures demanded in the presence of unexpected excellence. But all of them understood that something fundamental had just changed in the relationship between humanity and the established galactic order. Sarah stood and deactivated the electromagnetic field, allowing Vexthera to slowly regain control of her limbs. The Zephyrian warrior rose carefully to her feet, her multiple eyes studying the human with an expression that no translator could adequately render. "You could have killed me," Vexthera said finally. "The neural disruption could have been permanent if you had chosen to make it so." Sarah nodded. "Yes, it could have been. But humanity didn't need you to die, Vexthera. We needed you to understand that we're not the helpless prey species you thought we were. We're problem solvers. When faced with an impossible challenge, we don't just find a way to survive it. We find a way to make it irrelevant." Commander Thex's voice boomed across the arena as he demanded recognition from the arbiters. "This is trickery. Deception. The human has violated the spirit of honorable combat." High Arbiter Colton's response was delivered with the measured authority of 3 centuries of legal experience. The human champion used no prohibited weapons, no forbidden technologies, and no outside assistance. She defeated her opponent through preparation, knowledge, and the intelligent application of scientific principles. The trial was conducted within all established parameters. As Sarah walked toward the arena exit, she was surrounded by representatives from dozens of species, all asking questions, offering alliances, or simply trying to understand how a single human had just redefined what it meant to be dangerous in a galaxy full of predators. Ambassador Chen reached her first, his face showing a mixture of relief, pride, and dawning understanding of what this victory would mean for humanity's position in galactic politics. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked quietly as they walked. Sarah considered the question carefully. 6 months of intensive preparation once I identified this as a likely scenario. But honestly, humanity has been preparing for this moment since we first looked up at the stars and decided we belonged out there despite everything that should have made that impossible. Behind them, Vexthera limped slowly toward her own exit, her pride wounded but her warrior's respect for a superior opponent grudgingly acknowledged. She had faced the greatest fighters from 17 different species and emerged victorious. Today, she had learned that the most dangerous opponents weren't always the strongest or fastest. Sometimes, they were the ones who changed the rules of engagement so completely that strength and speed became irrelevant. The trial was over. Humanity had won the right to continue their expansion into the disputed territories. But more importantly, they had served notice to the galaxy that they were not just another minor species struggling to find their place among giants. They were innovators, problem solvers, and strategic thinkers who could turn their apparent weaknesses into devastating advantages. As news of the trial spread across the galaxy, military planners from every major species began reassessing their understanding of human capabilities. The species that had seemed like easy prey had just demonstrated why they had spread across dozens of star systems, despite being physically inferior to almost everyone they encountered. Sarah Martinez had walked into the grand arena as humanity's champion. She walked out as the woman who had changed the balance of power in the galaxy with 10 seconds of applied human ingenuity. The universe would never underestimate humanity again.